Welcome to the 54 podcast, everybody. In today's episode, it's just going to be me and Laz, so no need for any introduction. But before we get started, let's hop right into the intro.
Live from New York, it's Unfortunately Us.
Dude, what? It feels like I was at the Studio 54. Oh my god.
Is it done?
Yeah, it's done. It's done. If
sweet.
my finger goes down, that means it's done.
Oh, no, I know that. I was just fucking with you.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I think Chase is just upset still with me that I would edit out his comments every time he interrupted the song. Anyhow, guys, welcome to the 54 podcast. I know I already said that, but I'm going to reiterate myself because that's what I do. Today we have me and Laz, and that's it at the moment. Chase is unavailable at the moment, and so is Wilson and Patrick. So it's just me and my trusty second mic. Second mic.
Am I the Jamie to your Rogan?
Well, is Jamie even the second mic?
Yeah.
Is he the second mic?
Well,
I guess.
I don't know.
I would assume so, right? Or is
I guess so.
because like you could say that on Joey Diaz's podcast, Lee would be the second mic because he actually does participate.
Oh
in
yeah.
it. You know, he gets fucked up with them. Dude, I love Lee Sayat. Just a quick side piece there. I feel like Lee is the most pure man ever created, and he's probably going to be the first human being to die of a weed overdose, all because of Joey. So,
Oh man.
it's like
The way Joey Diaz abuses that man.
I know, right? It's like, how did Lee die? He's like, he OD'd on THC. Apparently, there is too much. But yeah, man. Yeah.
So, what's today's topic, Joe?
Fucking anything, really. Literally the only thing I have written on my whiteboard right now is uncut gems. So, you know.
Well, to be honest, I think we should talk about the protest that you actually just got back from.
Yes. That is true. So yeah, I attended a protest today in Union City. I had Wilson, who has been on the podcast before. I had him drop me off. For those who don't know, Wilson has cystic fibrosis, which is a pulmonary disease. So just to avoid risk, he didn't participate in the protest. He just dropped me off. We basically, the protest took place in Union City, New Jersey, and in North Bergen as well. And essentially, they started up at one of the major parks of North Bergen, New Jersey. Just for people that watch the Joey Diaz podcast, Joey Diaz is actually from North Bergen. They marched down from 80th Street all the way down to 32nd Street. I joined the protest around 43rd Street, and then I made my way down with them. I took photos of all the events. Laz has already seen them. So
they were really great.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. So yeah, you know, it's also hard to just focus and take photos that you know are going to look good while you're also, you know, kind of emotionally invested in this event. But it was really powerful. You know, I had never participated in anything like that, and it's humbling as well because you know that you're a part of history at that point. You know, I'm not trying to make these protests equivalent to the historical significance of the civil rights movement, but I'd like to think that the civil rights movement never really ended and is more of a continuation of that. And so, you know, and I got to be a part of history. I got to be able to spread that message through the art form that I adore. So, you know, it was quite an experience. A bunch of people got to talk and say their thoughts to the giant crowd of people, and everybody was just kind of on the same page, on the same frequency, and having fun and in their own way, I guess, and also expressing solidarity to one another.
And was there any kind of police presence there?
Yeah, there was a couple cops. Nobody was really being aggressive to them, I noticed, and they weren't really being aggressive either. They were actually safeguarding the protest, making sure that, you know, cars couldn't intercept the protest at any point. They were usually just patrol officers. Most of them didn't really have their vehicles. They were just walking alongside the protest. Some of them were in the actual protest, walking with us, but not a lot. There was like one or two that I could count off from where I was. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the street, by the end of where the protest is supposed to end, there were some motorcycle cops kind of guarding the end of that street as well. But there wasn't any kind of altercation or situation with them or the protesters. It was relatively peaceful, I want to say.
Yeah, that it's a real far cry from what's going on in New York, considering the way that police are responding there. It seems like the NYPD is just really
out of fucking control.
Out of fucking control. Is
yeah. I mean, and it's weird because we're literally right across the river from them. We're right across the Hudson. For people that don't know the placement of the towns that we're referring to, Union City, North Bergen, the Hudson County area here in New Jersey is right across the Hudson River from New York. So we're at a distance, basically 10 minutes, a 10-minute bus ride away from the heart of New York. So we're in close proximity, but there is a big difference between how the protests are being handled in these two different places.
Something Matthew just mentioned in the chat on YouTube Live, actually, New Jersey has been relatively smart, dealing with these protests compared to other states. It's been crazy looking on Twitter and just watching the crazy shit that's coming out of the police response to these protests. And to be honest, I could not be more proud of my state for basically, wising up and not responding to these lawful protests and this exercise of one of the most fundamental rights of an American with violence.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I mean, I feel like our state has been more tame about it and has been more intelligent with the way that, and more tactful as well with the way that they've been organizing these events. It's also nice to see the city governments, just our local government and the people that belong to them protesting with us. In Union City, Mayor Brian P. Stack walked with us, not just in this protest, but in the other ones that have also been in the local area. He's been participating in them with very minimal police entourage behind him. It's usually just him and like one other cop marching with the other protesters. So it's nice to see that they're also participating and volunteering in these events. Also, Brian Stack has been extremely mindful and also very very strategic with the whole COVID response as well. So he's the Hudson County is pretty happy with Stack, I would say, at this very moment. My opinion is just from what I'm seeing, but I'm sure there are people that have differing opinions. But from what I'm witnessing, a lot of people seem to have a good response to the mayor here.
Yes, it's been crazy seeing the fact that these protests are going on amidst a pandemic. Just really shows the fact that this is something that Americans really hold close to their heart. The fact that they're willing to go out there and essentially risk their lives in order to speak out on an issue that has plagued America basically since its inception.
Right.
Like you said before, the civil rights movement never ended. This is a continuation of it. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, it's still a subject that for some reason people think is political, which I don't believe so. It's not. It's essentially it's somebody else's life. There's no way that you can put any politics in another human being's life, yet there are still people out there who at least want to try to do so. And the only way to describe that behavior, in my opinion, is it's disgusting.
Well, it is. No, I mean, at the end of the day, it's murder. It was murder in broad daylight. I mean, we're seeing police officers not care when they're doing these acts as well, these acts of aggression. And all that lets me know is that they're confident that they're going to walk scot-free out of these situations. I mean, I don't know the cop's name that killed George Floyd, but he was...
Derek Chauvin.
He clearly... Yeah, exactly. He clearly knew he was being filmed. He knew what he was doing. And it doesn't seem... It didn't seem like he had any kind of... he didn't seem hesitant at all in what he was doing. And I feel like if you're a human being, your first your first initial reaction when you were dealing with a confrontation is not to kill that person. That's the last thing on your mind. And also, you as a human being, and most of us understand the consequences of doing something like that. So that's, we would never attempt that.
But the issue is
but
that
an officer, they can get away with it because,
they don't face any consequences for doing so.
Right.
Or
So
if they do, it ends up being something like being suspended with pay, or basically being fired, but then being able to move over a county and then join another police department.
right, and so there has to be a sense of reform to police officers and just the way that the system works. I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm sure there might be an obvious one that I'm just missing.
Well, I would say that one of the big things that's being proposed is defunding the police, which I agree with. I was actually looking into it, and the NYPD's budget is around $6 billion a year. $6 billion with a B.
Jesus Christ.
And that's just in acknowledged funding. There's still a lot of smoke and mirrors and some red tape that prevents us from really seeing the true scope of their budgeting.
Yeah, but they're also one of the largest. I'm not. Again, this isn't not in defense of them. I'm just merely curious. But they're also one of the largest police departments in the nation, aren't they?
They are, but there's no reason that a police department should have facial recognition technology, which I know that they have a deal with Microsoft wherein basically Microsoft has this program that does facial recognition technology, and then for every other police department that they license the software to, the NYPD actually receives 29% of that revenue.
Okay.
Which there's no point for this.
Right.
And for another thing, to compare it, the budget of the NYPD, for every dollar that they receive, programs such as low-income housing as well as community reform receive less than a quarter. If you want to actually fix the issues in these neighborhoods, the answer is not increasing funding for policing. It's in fact to reform the community and to bring people out of poverty.
I mean, do you think defunding the police is the only tactic that we really have, or do you think that there should be a reform to the way they're trained and recruited, which is what I think needs to be done?
I think that there's a big issue with police accountability. There's this thing called qualified immunity, which the Supreme Court has ruled as legal, wherein officers cannot be held liable to the full extent for their actions performed in their duties. That's why you don't see many officers being charged. Besides the fact that the people who are above them agree with their actions and support them, the whole thin blue line.
But doesn't it seem more logical that police officers should face higher scrutiny for a crime because they are supposed to uphold the law? Therefore, shouldn't they follow it more strictly? Given the
They should. They should, without a doubt. As a police officer, they say, "Oh, okay, not all cops are bad." Let me point out an issue with this argument. So you can reduce it to simple math. So there are 5 police officers in a room. 4 of them may be great family people, and they try to do their job. They don't have any complaints of excessive force. One of them is a piece of shit. He's a Derek Chauvin who had 18 complaints levied at him with absolutely no real consequences. But those 4 other officers are silent, and they don't say anything, and they don't intervene when they should. And that leaves you with 5 bad cops. That's why you see the slogan, ACAB, which means all cops are bastards. It's not directly attacking the individual police officers that it's more attacking the institution itself.
No, and I agree. The institution's fucked because I know officers that are good people personally, but I mean, and also I know that, or at least I've heard that contractually speaking, they're not allowed to badmouth their own departments, which to me is kind of that's a shot at the First Amendment from the get-go. If someone that's working for this institution can't badmouth it, that's just especially if it's a public institution, the way that the police is. But it seems ridiculous that a vast majority of police officers can't or just won't say anything about the situations that are going on. I feel that if there was a kind of rallying cry from within the police department, it would also help the movement along. But I don't think that's a realistic
But the thing is that there may not be a rallying cry from within the police department, but there sure is from out.
Right.
Of it.
which I think will definitely be able to create some change and hopefully some reform. But I don't know how far away that really is. I don't know if that's something that's going to happen soon, or if it's something that we're going to have to wait another 40 years to actually see something enacted. I hope not. I think people are being more vocal now than they were, and we also have social media now and whatnot.
From what you're seeing today, I know that, for example, in Minneapolis, they're banning chokeholds, which it's a start, but they banned chokeholds in New York in 1993, and that didn't help Eric Garner one bit.
Yeah. Whatever happened to those officers, by the way? I never followed up on that.
To my knowledge, they're still out there.
They're still working on the force?
To my knowledge, but I obviously cannot say that with any kind of concrete evidence. Mm-hmm. But what I do want to talk about is the response, at least amongst my friends. It's interesting to see that when you speak out on this issue and you try to be anti-racist, how your friends react. And it's been very interesting to see how some people have kind of cut contact with me, or and I've seen this from other friends as well, like who have mentioned it to me, where it's supposed to be this kind of controversial issue to basically say that Black Lives Matter. I don't understand where the controversy in that is, yet I have friends that are who say, oh, it's not my place to speak, but in reality, silence is violence, and the people who do not say anything are actively contributing to the racism.
Yeah. I know, and I agree with that. And I think, a lot of people are also, like you mentioned before we started streaming, you mentioned that some people are losing friends as a result of this. Some people are losing family members as a result of this. We can't be quiet about it. This is something that people have to actively push forward and make people aware that this is an ongoing issue in this country. A lot of people just kind of ignore it and put it to the back of their mind. And also, the white population usually doesn't even face scrutiny from officers. So to them, they're like, oh, they're living in ignorance. They don't understand. Or they just don't want to understand. And people have to take responsibility into their own hands and start realizing that this is something that we have to push forward. People have to be aware of this. And Trump isn't helping either. I don't know if you saw the whole photo op in front of the church.
Oh, yeah. When he tear gassed.
Yeah, tear gas protesters so he could walk across the street. What the fuck?
He tear gassed right? protesters so that he could have a photo op at a church that he does not go to hold up a Bible that he doesn't believe in.
Right.
And that just is disgusting, to the point where even a former Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, actually called his behavior dividing America. To sum it up, Jim Mattis, who is
the Secretary of Defense
he's the former Secretary of Defense, and he was a Marine for over 50 years roughly. He's beloved in the military community from what I've heard. He essentially said that Trump doesn't even try to unite his people, whereas he doesn't even try to pretend to unite his people. Whereas other people or other presidents, they at least made the show of it. Even if they were dividing the people, they at least tried to pretend. Whereas Trump just actively divides the people of America in order to suit his benefit and to suit the people around him.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trump is also potentially going to declare military action here in the United States. Under no circumstances should you ever deploy the military on domestic territory. Ever. The military is trained to kill and to do, obviously, more high-stakes actions than just handle protesters on the streets. There shouldn't be any reason to deploy them. And Trump has been threatening to do exactly just that. That is horrendous. That is actually horrendous, the fact that he's even considering that.
And that's actually something else that Mattis touches upon.
Yeah.
The National Guard is only supposed to be called in by the governors of their respective states when they're required.
Right.
You saw this in 1992 during the LA riots. As a response to Hurricane Katrina, they were called into Louisiana. The President of the United States should not be calling the National Guard into other states in order to take control in order to dominate the battle space. Who the fuck refers to American cities on American soil as a battle space?
Yeah, but it's not even the National Guard, right? He's also calling in actual, you know, army or Marines onto on a domestic territory, as far as I know. Which there's no reason that they should be deployed into our city, into any U.S. city for any real reason. Like I said, we have the National Guard to deal with that, but Trump shouldn't be deploying them either. And, you know, we have SWAT units and police units that, you know, obviously that's the whole reason we're protesting, but we have more localized units to deal with situations like this in a more controlled manner. But we shouldn't, under no circumstances should we actually send the military in. That's where I draw. That's not just where I draw the line. That's fucking ludicrous. The fact that Trump has done that he's even considering it. And I heard that over in California by L.A. that people have been spotting military transports honing in on the city. Again, I don't have any way to actually source that at the moment, but I've been seeing photos of transports heading towards L.A. And that's terrifying. Just knowing that something like that is on the horizon, and the fact that Trump thinks it's okay. You know, the fact that he doesn't he lives in this constant state of naivety. He doesn't understand what the fuck he's doing, and he doesn't listen to his cabinet. I mean, he's fired 80% of his cabinet since he started and has replaced most of them. Yeah. So it's a shit show, and he's not the president that should be empowered during a movement like this. He's the entirely wrong person. I mean, I don't like Biden as much either, but I feel like Biden is would be a bit more.
Not a bit more, a lot more. Whatever you're going to say next with that statement, it's going to be a lot more.
No, a lot more sympathetic, obviously, yeah. But I don't know, man. I feel like the state of our government, just even on a localized level, is in shambles, and something's going to have to be changed.
Something that's been heartening to see, actually, has been New York City representatives and councilmen have actually come out in support of the movement and have come out in support of defunding the police, which has been a great surprise. I know that the mayor of LA has also come out in support of defunding the police. Then again, this is also after he's been historically giving them budget increased. But, of course, it's good to see that at least some progress is. It looks like some progress will be made.
Right. As I understand that it's not positive that he's given those budget increases to his department, but the fact that he's at least doing this, whether it's honest or not, I mean, he's still doing it, so it's going to enact some kind of change.
I saw a tweet that said, when all 50 states are protesting the same issue, the government should realize that they are the problem here.
Right.
I think that some representatives are realizing that, and they're starting to turn around and realize that. I actually saw that earlier today. The NFL actually came out and said that they were wrong to try to silence Kavanaugh, or not Kavanaugh, well, wrong, completely different Tom, Kaepernick. Mm-hmm. But this was also in response to a video where some prominent NFL stars actually said they basically called out the NFL for being racist and promoting that kind of ideology. They banned kneeling during the national anthem when Kaepernick spoke to a former special operations army soldier. I don't know the correct term, obviously. Mm-hmm. But he spoke to him and asked what would be the most respectful way to show this sign of protest against police brutality. And the veteran, originally Kaepernick was going to just remain seated during the national anthem, but the soldier said that the most respectful way to do it would be to actually kneel during the protest. Mm-hmm. And he did so, and then people came out against him. And these same people are trying to say that the violent protesters are wrong when the violent protesters only have become violent because of the fact that they haven't been listened to.
Right, and I think people aren't realizing that. People are looking at these riots and going, "How could they? How could they fucking do that?" And it's like, don't you realize that there were already peaceful protests trying to get this message across from the get-go? The only reason this is happening at the moment is because nobody listened to them from the beginning. So this is the way that things naturally progress as a result. I'm not mad at the protesters. I'm not mad at the rioters for doing what they do. Them trashing a Target is not necessarily it's not even a big deal considering that that's a giant
That's a
corporation.
multi-million-dollar corporation.
Yeah. The only thing I'd be concerned
doesn't let me
about,
feel it.
the only thing I would be concerned about in that regard is just the employees that work at those stores, because they're essential workers during this whole pandemic. So it's a little concerning just because I don't know what their employment situation is going to be after this, given that the store is probably going to be closed due to the fact. So that's my concern. I don't know if Target has reached out or said anything officially about it.
To be honest, I know you've worked at a Best Buy. I've worked, at several retail locations. If somebody burned down my place of work for that cause, I would be in complete support of it. Property can be replaced, lives cannot, and black lives cannot.
Right. I know, and I agree with that. I think it's fine to be in support of it. I just think those people. I just don't think that they should also be, fucked, even though they support it. I don't think it's just a situation where, they should be dumped into an unemployment situation as a result. Mm-hmm. But then again, I don't really know what's going on. Target might be, helping them out financially during the situation, but I wouldn't know.
Possibly. Seto in the YouTube Live says, "Are you guys going to show up to the protest near us?" I don't know where near us means, but I to be honest, I would love to go to protests. I live with my 83-year-old grandmother, so going to protests is kind of a trade-off. But I am planning on going to them when I'm visiting in South Jersey. So probably going to the Philadelphia ones.
I just went to the ones here in Union City in North Bergen. I posted some photos on Instagram. If you'd like to check them out.
They're also on the 54 podcast, so at the 54 podcast on Instagram.
Right, yeah, they're also on there. They're on my Facebook. They're all over the place. But and I might attend another one if there's another one localized. I might go to New York as well. I really don't mind putting myself in these places. I just, I'm there to cover an event, take photos, and also just be there for the experience and spread the message as well. So I wouldn't mind attending either one.
He also says there's going to be one in North Bergen.
Yeah. Well, that's the one today started in North Bergen, but I guess there's another one in place. But yeah, there's one going on in Jersey City as well today, at the same time that the one up here was going on.
Yep. It was going on at City Hall today.
Yeah, I saw that.
And actually, something I wanted to mention was actually at the Jersey City one I saw a week ago that the JCPD did actually kneel in solidarity. But something interesting to mention is that it did take them a few minutes. It took a few minutes of just, saying, all right, kneel with us, before one officer finally did. It definitely, you can see, in their faces, they kind of seem like they're trying to put on that hard face and, act like they're not going to, but then one of them finally does.
Yeah. Well, they seem to be hesitating. And that also makes me wonder, what's in their contracts.
To be honest, I'm not going to lie. I've seen videos all over, YouTube, Twitter saying, showing police kneeling in solidarity with protesters, and that's good until you see, videos an hour later of the same police department then tear gassing those very same protesters. It to be honest, it doesn't seem very genuine a lot of the time, but obviously there are some, like, it's been a mixed bag in my opinion.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know. I saw that in, where was it?
I know in Seattle that happened where the police kneeled in solidarity with them and then went and fucked them up like an hour later.
Where was it? What's that town in Michigan? The one that that had the issue with the water. I'm trying to Flint. I think Flint.
Which I just want to mention, Flint still does not have clean water.
Right.
That has not been fixed. Just wanted to put that out there.
Well, and I've noticed that I think it was Flint. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw a video of the sheriff of the town coming to the protests with a megaphone and telling everybody, we're here for you. We're here for you for this movement. We're going to protect you. We're going to make sure that this protest goes smoothly. And they got everybody together, and the sheriff was like hugging people in the crowd and shaking hands and just continuously reassuring them that they were going to be safe to protest. Which was refreshing to see. You know, it was refreshing to see that side of things. It not saying that, you know, that's look there's one cop being good here, but more so of it shows that some change is occurring on a small scale, but at least it's occurring. And, you know, I'm hoping that more places could eventually be like that police department, you know, because that's what we need.
Well, something that that New Jersey has started floating around, and I just want to say this real quick, and then I actually want to talk about South Jersey. But something that Governor Murphy has said is that he plans on introducing police reform and introducing state licensing, which would be an interesting thing to see. So police officers need to earn a post certification. It's a POST. It certifies them as a peace officer, essentially. And what a lot of police officers will do is that they have the option of completing the training, you know, 6 months after they join a particular police department. So what a lot of them will do is they will move laterally between police departments, like jumping from police department to police department, and not actually fulfilling that certification. But yet they're still able to, you know, walk a beat. They're still able to act as a police officer. They're still able to arrest you. They're still able to fucking shoot you. I'm hesitant to see what Governor Murphy plans on doing, but I'm at least glad that there's been a response to it.
Well, you know, another thing that I was talking with Chase about on episode 5, something I wanted to ask you about, although I don't know if you'd know, but I'd still like your opinion. We were talking about the differences between cops up here and cops in the Midwest and the South, and what their differences, if there are any, really are. And, you know, Chase and I were talking about how cops up here are still aggressive, but they're not on the scale that Midwestern and Southern cops are.
In what way?
So, for example, Chase, you know, is very white. But even he and his friends, who are also white, have faced extreme aggression from certain officers. Obviously not on the scale that, you know, somebody that's Hispanic or black or what have you would normally face. But, you know, they've been... there's been cases of people being, you know, beaten. He's witnessed it. Aggressive arrests for, you know, basically loitering, essentially. So, you know, but it seems that, and they're also, you know, way more racist. They will say shit to your face that's obviously discriminatory, and they don't care.
Oh, yeah. I saw a video earlier where a female officer, I can't remember the city, actually just straight up called somebody the N-word, like,
just didn't give
white
a shit.
officer. Yeah. It was fucking disgusting. It was, and here's the thing that I don't understand. These things are caught on video, and they're broadcast across the world. Millions of people watch these videos, and yet nothing is done about it by the police departments, because at the end of the day, these police unions actually have so much sway. And I'm not saying unions are a bad idea. I will never say unions are a bad idea, because they're not. However, the police unions do they just do some shady ass shit. I've been tweeting at the New York Police Benevolent Association for the last week, essentially, like just going at it in the threads. And it's crazy the kind of shit that the way that they'll take a situation and try to paint themselves in a positive light. You saw this with the officer who was hit by a brick. He was hit by a brick, and that caused another officer to draw his weapon. And they made a big deal out of it in the media when police officers are doing literal drive-bys with mace canisters, and they're just straight up beating the shit out of protesters. But all of a sudden, a brick is like the end-all, be-all of it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a crazy double standard to see, where, you know, all of a sudden police unions will cry victim because of these actions, when they're the ones who are making it worse to begin with. You know, there's no need to respond to peaceful protests by trapping protesters in an area and tear gassing them. Have you seen that video?
I think I have, yeah. I also saw the guy that got hit in the eye with a tear gas canister,
Oh,
And
was it the homeless man? Because here's the thing:
yeah.
when you mention that, the fact that multiple
Mm-hmm.
instances of that coming up,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that that's a thing, and I can think of multiple different times that's happened is crazy. Because
Mm-hmm.
there was the homeless man who was doing absolutely nothing, and he was hit with a tear gas canister, and it's happened to multiple people. There have been reporters who have been tear gassed and hit with pepper ball on live TV.
Right. No, it's fucking horrendous. I've been seeing the way that they've been handling the situation. I mean, again, it doesn't. Not every city is facing the same issues, but if you look at it, there are a good number of U.S. cities that are just facing horrendous responses from their police departments. I mean, the guy that got hit in the eye with the tear gas canister lost his eye. He had to get it removed. Like there was no saving it. You know, they just partially blinded a man. And it was, I mean, this whole situation. I mean, you saw the thing with the, what was it, the 76-year-old man? I forgot what state it was in.
But
But,
it was upstate New York, Buffalo.
oh, was it? Yeah, it was in Buffalo. Yeah, that's right. It was in Buffalo. And like 25, what was it, 25 officers in that unit just left. They resigned.
Oh, it was no. So what happened was
Mm-hmm.
57 officers of the Buffalo Police Department who are members of their emergency response team. This
Yeah.
was a team that was formed after the Ferguson demonstrations. You know, you remember those a few years
Yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah.
It was formed in Buffalo
Mm-hmm.
after those demonstrations in order to they were basically riot police for all
Mhm.
intents and purposes. And so this team, 57 of them, they actually resigned from the emergency response team. They're still officers, but they resigned from the riot control aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they respond in solidarity with their fellow two shitheads, sorry, that were actually charged recently. I actually saw the mugshot for those two officers, and you want to know what stuck out to me?
What?
The fact that these two officers in their mugshot, they were allowed to clean up and get into suits for them.
Oh my God, are you fucking serious? They went, so
Yeah.
they allowed them to have that kind of privilege.
Yeah, they were charged with
photographing them.
assault, and yet they were still allowed to clean up and dress up in
That's
suits. When,
fucking stupid. No, they don't get benefits. They're also being arrested. They're also having their mugshots taken. You have to face the same exact scrutiny that the people that you arrest are also facing. If it doesn't, it's not fair. That's a complete, and it goes to show right there and then that there's a disbalance. That alone shows you that there's a disbalance.
Matthew mentioned something that's very important, and it's that reporters are also being arrested for simply doing their job.
Yeah.
And habeas corpus was suspended in New York. If you don't know what habeas corpus means, it means it's essentially your constitutional right to a trial. So it's essentially your right in the legal system.
Mm-hmm.
So when habeas corpus was suspended, it was also suspended during the Civil War by President Lincoln, but obviously that was a completely different situation.
Mm-hmm.
But it was suspended in New York to essentially, ostensibly, meaning on the outside, it was to protect, basically to better manage looters amidst the coronavirus pandemic. But in actuality, it's being used to just arrest protesters and hold them. And without any kind of due process, without any kind of rights, and they won't even socially distance these people that they're arresting. They'll put them together and deny them the ability to call their lawyer.
You're dehumanizing these people by doing that. I mean, these are tactics that you would expect to be used by some, I don't even know what the point.
Oh, I know exactly the way to tell it.
Yeah.
We spent the latter half of 2019 watching the Hong Kong protests play out, and now we're spending what seems like it'll be the entirety of the rest of 2020 watching these same exact behaviors play out here. Mm-hmm. The fact that the same exact flyers that were being made for Hong Kong protesters in order to protect them and give them good tips are being used in America is crazy. Mm-hmm. You would not think that this would happen here, and it's not just happening in the United States. It's actually happening across the world because there are other protests and there are other marches in other cities. I know that
in London, John Boyega was leading, or was.
Yep. I was actually going to mention that, but my cousin, who lives in London, mm-hmm. She actually.
You have a cousin who lives in London? Holy shit! Anyhow, continue.
So she was actually talking to my uncle. I was just talking to him before we started recording, and so he was telling me that they were held in the plaza where they were protesting for 5 hours without being allowed to use the bathroom, without being allowed to leave to go back home, and they were essentially told that they needed to stay there. If they tried leaning on like one of the buildings to rest or to try to like sit down, they were told to get up. They were told to stop doing that. So it's not just something that we're seeing in the United States. We're seeing, a ridiculous police response across the world. I know that people are getting tear gassed in Germany, in Berlin, and people are getting tear gassed in London. And it just shows that this is not an issue just simply limited to the United States. However,
No, I know it's not exclusively a domestic issue.
It's only in the United States that you see people just completely circle jerking over the fucking police.
Yeah.
Like not I don't mean I mean this in like a supportive way. Like this is the only country where you see people, oh man, the thin blue line with their little fucking Punisher emblems on the back of their lifted trucks and shit like that.
You know what's hilarious about that? Marvel actually released a response to the whole Punisher skull being used by police departments and whatnot. They actually included it in one of their comics. They had a scene or a panel where they showed cops talking to Frank Castle. And they were like, hey, look, we have this symbol. We use this symbol because you've taught us how to do things the right way. And then Frank has like this moment where he kind of breaks and he just talks to them. And he says, he's like, I am not what you're supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be your role model. I do this because I feel like I need to do this. But you're not supposed to follow my example. You're not supposed to go
Doesn't he say, if you want to look up to a hero, look up to Captain America?
Yeah, he says, if you want to look up to a hero, look up to Captain America. That's who you should be idolizing. And then they kind of get like, they're like, oh, well, you did this already. You already set this precedent, so you shouldn't be telling us to stay away from it, from not idolizing you. And he's like, the second that you start being like me, I'm coming after you next. Is what he said.
Well, it's true. I mean, the whole character of the Punisher was formed in response to the fact that the police weren't working.
Right.
They were actually going after the crime, and they were in fact becoming the criminals themselves. So it's very crazy to see, how the Punisher skull has become a symbol of like, it's been basically bastardized.
Because the police are like, look what he's doing. It's like, no officer should be idolizing a guy who goes around just massacring people on the quote unquote criminals on the street. Like, Frank is a mentally ill person. That's well established in Marvel. He's not okay in the head. Nobody picks up a gun and goes out and just starts entrusting the law on their own shoulders. Nobody would do that that has a right sense of mind. And so when, police, in real life, when police and military forces or like the National Guard or whatnot start using that skull to represent themselves, it's not a good look.
It really is.
You're putting a mentally ill person's insignia on your arm. It doesn't click in them. Like that's not, the Punisher's not supposed to be an idolized character. He's interesting, but he's not supposed to be this fucking hero. He's never even called a hero.
He's called an anti-hero.
Yeah, he's called literally an anti-hero. It's like the cops are not that. That's not, don't look. If anybody here is watching that might be an officer or somebody that was an officer at some point, or just supports them or whatever the fuck, don't use the fucking Punisher skull to give yourself some kind of pride in your movement. It doesn't work. It makes you look stupid, and it just makes you look exactly the way that we assume most police are: harmful, dangerous, and psychotic. Don't do it. So don't do it. And going back to what's going on here in the U.S., in Cincinnati, I saw this video recently. There were these teen protesters that were arrested. They were asked to, before they were arrested, they were asked to sit down on the sidewalk while they I'm not sure what they were doing, questioning them. I don't know why they had to wait. And they took the girl's bag, one of the girl's bag, and the kids were continuously asking the police officer to hand over the bag because the girl is diabetic and she needs her insulin. And they refused. They kept refusing. They said there was one of the officers was just kind of laughing at the whole situation, like he didn't see it as a big issue. He said, "Oh, I know what diabetes is. I know what it entails." And it's like, clearly you don't, because you're not getting this girl her insulin, and she's freaking out. You know, she seems like she's about to go into shock. And then he eventually has them all arrested, and he tells her, "Oh, it'll be okay. We're gonna have you sent to the place where they process them. There's a medic there. He'll take care of you." And then she had to wait they got her on a bus with other protesters they had rounded up. She had to wait for 3 hours before they even processed her. And when she got there was no medic at all.
Wow. Well, that actually reminds me of something that is kind of close to home for me. So, in 2004, my cousin, his name is Florencio Morales Jr. You can look him up. He was being held by the police, and he had just gotten into a fight with somebody. You know, he was being arrested, and he was having an asthma attack. He had asthma, and so he was essentially trying to tell the officers that, you know, he needed his inhaler. And the officer picked up his inhaler. You know, he was found a few feet away from where he was, where they were holding him. And the officer didn't give him the inhaler, and he died. And that was my cousin.
Oh my God! You fucking. Oh.
And that was actually Jersey City Police Department. And do you want to know what the worst part of it was? So my great grandfather, who was the father of my cousin, he actually spent years trying to battle this in court, and nothing ever came of it. The officers in question did not receive training on how to deal with the situation wherein somebody was having respiratory failure, and there was nothing ever came of it.
Well, you posted this video how like hairstylists receive more training than officers.
Yeah, it's true.
They have to go through more rigorous training for a longer extended period of time than an officer does before they get on the field. I mean,
yeah, it's true. And if officers had more training, or, you know, if the fact that if those officers had just looked at my cousin on the floor and said, you know, "Oh, okay, this guy who's crying for his fucking inhaler, maybe he needs this inhaler that's in my hands right now. Maybe, you know, I should give it to him."
You know, I don't think you even need to be trained for that. That's just common sense at that point. I mean, you know, this person's suffocating. It's not like you don't know what a fucking inhaler is. I mean, don't act that stupid. You know, and then, you know, it's simply just give it to them. They know how to use it. It's clearly not something dangerous. I mean, what is in question here? Why can't they just comply? What's the outcome?
Do you want to know why?
Well, what was their justification for this?
Well, there wasn't any justification. In my opinion, it was because my cousin was a Hispanic man who they had just arrested.
They never gave like a statement trying to quote unquote justify their actions. I'm not saying it was
their statement was that they believed that he was on drugs.
What the fuck? Are they serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's no. What? Oh, dude. I'm sorry that happened. I never even knew about that. That's
the thing is that the reason that these things aren't really mentioned too much is because at the end of the day, a lot of people feel like there is no recourse for it. There's no way to essentially get any kind of justice for it, and that's what a big part of this movement is about. And that's why, at least it personally hits home to me. You know, I've seen it happen to my own family. You know, my family may not be black, but they were still brutalized by the police as well. So it's been, you know, my great grandfather spent a lot of money trying to bring those people to justice, and they never were.
I feel like I've also experienced a sense of privilege, of white privilege, when it comes to officers, because I've had many encounters with them, and I've basically always walked away scot-free. I never have to mention that I'm Hispanic. I don't look it. So there's no way that they really know. And even recently, I don't know if you know about the trip that I took down to the South with Chase and Patrick recently in the van. But when we were coming back, we went the long route, and at one point we're in Ohio, ironically enough. We're 15 miles south of Cleveland when our van breaks down. Our van breaks down, and Chase, basically the engine's completely off at this point, so we're just using the inertia and momentum that we already had to pull off on the ramp.
Yeah.
So we were just going 60, and we kept that. And then we pulled off the ramp, and then the car slowly came to a stop as we pulled to the side of the road. And immediately, it was raining pretty hard, and immediately a cop comes out, or pulls up behind us, an officer. He's a white officer. He comes out, or he parks up behind us. He's on the dispatch microphone, and I walk up to him. I just walk up to him.
Yeah.
And literally do this with my arms. I put my arms, rest them on his windows. I was a little stoned, not gonna lie. I didn't really realize what the intensity of what I was doing. I nonchalantly just placed my arms on his window and talked to him and told him what the issue was. I'm almost certain if it was someone who was black that tried to attempt to even get close to the car, that reaction would have been different.
Oh, without a doubt.
But I went up to him. I was like, "Hey, this is what's going on." We had just smoked pot in there. Patrick and Chase didn't even realize there was an officer behind us when I was talking to him yet. Really? So I went up to Patrick. I'm like, "Hey, there's an officer," and immediately Patrick's eyes whitened, and he grabbed the nearest Febreze that he could find, and he just started spraying the shit out of the van. And I led the officer back to the car, and he inspected it to see if he could find out what the problem was. He saw that we were leaking oil, and then he called a tow service for us to bring it to a Firestone. This is in a town called Medina, Ohio, by the way. He was super courteous to us. Again, me and Chase are white. Patrick is the only brown person in our trio. So, but Patrick didn't even face any scrutiny. The officer was social with him. And then he even offered us a ride to the Firestone so that we could follow up on the van. And then he offered us a ride to the motel, to any motel that we had selected. Yeah. And he thanked us. He sent us on our way. Or we thanked him rather. And he said it was wonderful meeting you guys. And he gave us his card as well if we ever needed to call him again for anything. And it was a nice experience. And he also talked about this whole. We actually briefly spoke about it when we were in the cruiser with him, about police brutality and whatnot. Well, he brought it up himself. He's like, "Hey guys, I don't want you guys to think I'm just doing this favor for you because of privilege or whatnot. I feel like we, all officers obviously get a bad rap because of the select few that act like jackasses, And I didn't really question him on it because I didn't want to get into a controversial discussion with an officer that was doing us a favor.
Yeah.
But I felt like he was being sincere, but I couldn't tell. It's hard to really tell sometimes with any officer for that matter. But he did talk about it. He's like, I was in the military. I was born and I think raised in South Carolina, and I joined the military there, and I did my service, and I came here and I became an officer. And he's like, I don't believe in the things that most police officers decide to do, their tactics the way that they are. I don't agree with most of that, and it's a shame because that representation's thrust on me. But that's what he said. Again, I didn't, but I just kind of nodded my head, and that was it.
Something I do want to point out there is that when you started that, you mentioned that it was a show of white privilege, and it's true. Yeah. I was having a conversation with my uncle, who's black, very noticeably so, and he was talking about how when he was just going up to a police car, because he's a truck driver, so he was going up to a police car to ask for directions because he didn't know where to go, and he kind of had his hand by his side, walking normally. one hand kind of near his pocket, and the officer actually, he could see the officer literally like put his hand on his holster in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to point out the dichotomy of your experience versus my uncle's experience, because at the end of the day, I don't want to speak for that officer because I obviously don't know the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like he was doing it out of the kindness of his heart,
Mm-hmm.
but it still is a symptom of white privilege because I know you're Hispanic, Joe. I know it.
Right, but most people don't. Looking at me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does still happen. And something about white privilege that for some reason, when you bring up white privilege, a lot of people get uncomfortable because they think that they haven't earned what they've earned on their own merits because you're just chalking it all up to white privilege. That isn't what white privilege is. White privilege is the fact that you can go up to a police car without fearing for your life. White privilege is having the option to stay silent during times like this. White privilege is being able to say, "Oh man, it's not my battle. It's not my place to say anything." It doesn't just stem from, "Oh man, you see a lot of people saying, "I had it tough. Where was my white privilege then?"
Right.
And they neglect to see the fact that white privilege isn't just your financial status.
Right. No, I think a lot of people feel ashamed to even recognize that they have it, but I do. I'm not ashamed to say that I have that. That I do have white privilege. That I can. Every encounter that I've had with an officer is barely memorable, with the exception of the one in Ohio, because I've always walked away with no issues from them. And again, it's because of the way that I look. I'm almost positive about that, and also the people I've been with, are usually also white. The officers don't know I'm Hispanic. They don't. If they have prejudices, they have no way to. They have no obvious physicality to shame me for that. And so I don't know. Have you had any experiences with officers? Because I know you look white, but you are half black and you're half Hispanic. For those that don't know.
Yeah,
And
my mom was very light.
Mm-hmm.
I have, to be honest, I haven't had many experiences with the police. Thankfully, I say thankfully simply because when I see a police car, I do not feel like immediately safe. I do not feel safe, and I think that this is a common thing that people feel in America, where they see police officers and they don't feel at ease.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been driving and you see a police car behind you, and even though you've done nothing wrong, you still feel scared.
And that shouldn't be the inherent feeling you get when you see an officer.
And growing up in low income kind of deal, it's crazy to see that people don't understand that. From where I grew up and the people I grew up around, if you said you were going to become a police officer, then it was like, what the fuck's wrong with you? Because everybody around that area always had negative experiences with the police. The police were always the enemy for them. And a lot of that stems from the fact that they were treated differently. Because I grew up with my Puerto Rican side of the family, and they are Hispanic. They are very Hispanic. So to see, they definitely did not receive the same treatment that I would, because I was lighter than them. So it's crazy to see.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's funny, when I was in the 8th grade, I wanted to be an officer. I remember telling people that, and I'm also kind of having that, like, what the fuck kind of reaction. Like, why would you want to do that? I always naively, in my mind, I always had this naive thought of, oh, I could be the better one. I could be the change. I'm not going to follow those examples. Because even as a kid, I was aware of, just how bad the situation really was. Because it's obvious. You just look around and you see it. But I always had the naive thought of just being the difference in the force. And I feel like a lot of people that join the force, even now in modern times, have that expectation. But I think expectations never meet reality. once they get in there, it's I think people just realize that they can't, for whatever reason, whether it be for legal reasons or whatnot. It's almost like they're almost not allowed to be that pristine version that they envisioned themselves to be or wanted to be.
Well, yeah. and that goes back to the thin blue line. You saw that in the video from Buffalo. You see when the man gets pushed over and he hits the floor. You see the officer in front. He starts to go to help him, and then the other officer next to him kind of like pulls him away from helping the old man. In fact, if you go back to the video, you don't even see anybody help him until the National Guard that's behind the officers go to help him. All the other officers keep walking, and they kind of rush forward. The best way to describe it, and the way I've always heard it described, is that the police department are the biggest gang in the United States. If you speak out against them, then you're in the police department, you're ostracized. It's when you have a culture that breeds, that mentality of it's either us or them, and you devolve down to tribalism that is inherent in people. People are tribalistic by nature.
What's funny about you mentioning that? My uncle and I literally had this exact same conversation about how people are tribalistic by nature. But anyhow, we'll talk about that in a second. But keep going to what you were saying.
People are tribalistic by nature, and so when they breed that culture of us versus them, you do see officers who may go into the police force and intending to be that person, intending to make that change and be the cop that they want to be. And but you then see those same officers have that broken out of them, have that taken out of them by the officers who already exist, and by remaining silent about these injustices, they in turn become those officers themselves, because it's normalized.
Right. And I think that's the main issue, is that this behavior is just normalized amongst everybody. I mean, and I think officers that go in with good intentions are just kind of made fun of by their peers. They're just kind of forced into a position where it's like, oh, don't think about that. Don't think about being the better man. Just do your job. Meet your quota. I feel like those people are just immediately, like you said, ostracized for trying to be better by their peers.
And you want to know what's interesting is that those 57 police officers in Buffalo who resigned the emergency response team in response to those two officers being charged for assault. One of the reasons that they cited was that they said that those two officers were just following their orders. That is in no way an excuse.
No, you don't hit an elderly man and then say you're just following your orders.
Well, let me continue.
Yeah.
They were saying that they were just following orders, and the Nazis in Nuremberg used that same exact excuse. I'm not saying that these police officers are Nazis, although they do bear some resemblance to the fascist ideology that
Gestapo.
the Nazis did espouse. That being said, these officers say that, they're just following orders. In the military, from what I've been told, you're taught that that is never an excuse. You're never just told, I was just following orders. That's never an excuse. You're supposed to know right from wrong. You're supposed to know lawful from unlawful, and you're supposed to follow that according to the law. Even if your superior orders you to do something illegal, you say no. You refuse to follow that illegal order. And it's something that you don't see in the police at all. That's why it's crazy. That's why it's astounding when you see a video of a police officer actually intervening when excessive force is going on. That I saw a video earlier today where a black woman who's a policewoman, she actually basically went off on this one white officer who pushed a protester who was kneeling down, had her hands up in the air, and this policeman pushed her onto the ground, and this policewoman went off on him. And it was probably one of the most. It was a very cathartic experience to see that. But the fact that
was she like his commanding officer, or she just another?
No. It was very cathartic to see because the fact that it's something that doesn't happen. It's something that you don't really see, and that's the issue. In Dallas, they're actually working on an order to where if an officer sees something excessive force, they're supposed to intervene. They have to intervene. And that is something that we need in this country. That's something that we need worldwide. I don't understand how that isn't something that's already been implemented.
Mm-hmm. It just seems, I just have to honestly say that it's not just even in this country. I mean, if you look outside of this country at the police forces of other nations, I mean, they're also corrupt or broken or just not ideal or effective at all. When I visited Ecuador, you could bribe the police. It's normal there. We did it. We actually did it. When we were driving down the highway, we were on this place. We were driving out of Guayaquil, which is the main coastal city of New York, the main port city, just basically one of the largest cities in there, besides Quito. And we were driving from there to Salinas, which is a coastal city, very modern in Ecuador. And we were getting close to a toll booth. And as we drove up, one of these officers, he came up in front of the car. He stopped it. And then he let all the cars behind us keep moving. He had no reason to stop us. We weren't doing anything illegal. And then we lower the window down, and he's talking to our friend who's driving us, and my mom, who's in the passenger seat. I'm in the back seat. And he's like, he doesn't really have like any kind of excuse. It was so forgettable that I forgot what he actually said. And then eventually he sees me in the back seat. He notices I'm not wearing a seatbelt. And I don't know, even though by law here it says that everybody, even including in the back seats, have to wear seatbelts. Most people that sit in the back seat don't usually wear a seatbelt. And nobody really gets shit for that around here, right? But so I was used to that. I didn't wear a seatbelt in the back seat because I was sitting there. And then he saw that I wasn't wearing one, and then he made the claim that I stopped you because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. There was no way he could see me from his position when he slowed down the car. And he went, he's like, he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And then eventually, my mom's friend just kind of like tried to say that it was, she's like, please, I'm a God-fearing woman. don't do anything, and then my mom was like offering him money, and he was about to take it before he wrote the ticket. He was writing the ticket, and then I just lowered my window and I said, "Sir, with all due respect, I'm an American. Where I'm from in the United States, it's not customary to wear a seatbelt in the back seat. It's optional. It's not mandatory like it is here. So my apologies for my ignorance." And he kind of heard me say that, and immediately he's like, "Okay, well, since you're visiting, I guess I could give you guys a pass." But regardless, my mom still gave him like $5 just to, put everything at ease. So like as if it never happened. And that's just one example that I saw personally. But these things are going on through Ecuador entirely, or just countries like this. You could bribe the police, no problem. It's not seen as a major issue, which in of itself is an issue.
Yeah.
But I also had not direct family, but somebody that is a relative of someone that married into our family. Was once he was a kid. I think this was in 2000 or something. He was in Guayaquil and he was playing with. He was like kind of like fucking around with one of the security guards, one of the officers present, because the officers are security guards as well there. And he was like just fucking around with him, and then as a joke he grabs the revolver in the cop's holster, because the holsters are on the armored vests on the chest, so he pulls the revolver out, and as a joke he's like, "Look at this gun, like you haven't maintained this gun at all, it's all rusty." And the officer, instead of like trying to get the gun back, like you shouldn't be doing that, just kind of like went along with it. And he's like, "Look, this gun is like, look, it's rusty. This gun doesn't work. If you were to try and use this, you'd immediately like you'd die in a line of fire." And the cop's like, "Hey, maybe you should give that back to me. I can assure you that it works. I cleaned it today." And the kid's like, "No, it doesn't. Watch this." And he pointed the barrel underneath his chin and he pulled the trigger. Wow. And the gun went off, and it killed him, obviously. And the officer was barely penalized for that entire situation. They put it down to, they basically, what was it? They I think stated that it was like fault of the other party, that the officer had no accountability for that situation. And this is in a country outside of the United States. I'm not saying that the relative that did this, obviously, he was a kid, but obviously I'm saying, it doesn't excuse that obviously he did something wrong, but that officer also didn't act to try and stop it.
Mm-hmm.
He could have done something to stop it, and he didn't. It just exists worldwide, is really my point here.
And it does exist worldwide. That's why you see protests worldwide.
Yeah.
Actually, something I wanted to bring up, I just found this out. Apparently, there's a woman called Sarah Grossman. She just graduated from Ohio State, and she actually just died today after being sprayed with tear gas at a protest in Columbus, Ohio.
Really? I didn't even know tear gas was lethal like that.
No, it is. You don't know that?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry for my ignorance.
She died of respiratory failure. That's why tear gas isn't legal to use in war.
So then why do we use it domestically? That seems ridiculous.
Because the police don't give a fuck.
That's like us ignoring the Geneva Convention, being like, well, mustard gas is not good to have on the field, but, if people get angry in New York City, let her rip. Like, no, that's ridiculous. If we don't use tear gas in war, then we shouldn't be using it domestically. There's no reason to use it on our own citizens if we're not using it on an enemy, quote unquote. It just that's ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know that. I genuinely didn't know tear gas was that lethal.
No, it can cause respiratory failure. That being said, something else I wanted to bring up was the fact that in Wilmington, North Carolina, police officers actually faked kneeling to draw protesters closer just so they could fucking tear gas them.
Are you fucking serious?
Yeah, there's a video.
They baited them?
Yeah.
That's dude.
In the video, you can hear them going, "Oh, they're kneeling," and they start cheering, and then you see the fucking tear gas canister get shot at them. Right after.
Jeez, no. That's fucked. No, why? Why? If you got the protesters to stand with you in solidarity, why the fuck would you do that? They're not.
Well, no. The point was to trick the protesters to get them closer.
No, I agree with that, but my point is there was no need to trick them if they were already standing with you in solidarity. The second that they did that just meant that they were going to be nonviolent. I
don't understand what you mean by standing in solidarity there.
Well, no. I mean, like, the fact that the officers were kneeling with them, right, and the protesters started cheering, right. So in that regard, what I'm trying to say is that the second that happens, the second that the protesters start cheering for them, that should be a sign of the fact that these protesters are not going to act out violently towards the officers. The fact that they didn't enact any kind of violence towards them. So the fact that they baited them just seems ridiculous. It seems counterproductive to me because they were already showing that they weren't going to do anything violent. So why do that to them?
Okay, hold on. I'm going to cut you off there. All right. They're not being counterproductive because their entire fucking point was to gas the protesters.
Yeah.
I think your wording was kind of fucked there, to be honest.
Yeah, probably.
But, and
I wasn't giving the cops any kind of what do I call it? I wasn't giving them a compliment. What I was trying to say is that it just seems stupid that they did that at all, given the fact that once the protesters show not to be nonviolent, then you shouldn't even be firing canisters at them. If they prove to just be, peaceful protesters from the get-go, then you shouldn't be using any kind of violent method to take them out, quote unquote. I say quote unquote a lot. I apologize for that, but I don't think that it's just there's no human decency when it comes to that. You should be thinking about how to avoid causing any harm to these individuals rather than just baiting them to do just that. I mean, that's what I mean. But,
No, I get where you're coming from. That being said, I think we've been streaming. Damn, we've gone on for the last 74 minutes. Holy hell.
Yeah, we have an hour and 14 minutes going. But I mean, yeah, I don't know, man. It's just nationwide there's a movement going on, and I just feel that the kind of justice that we're demanding is long overdue. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, and then 100 years later, in the 1960s, there's still racism and segregation in the country. And then, after the 60s, fast forward to modern day, it's still prevalent. It still exists. Segregation might be over, but racism is still very much prevalent. And it's buried very deeply within our institution.
And I don't want to cut you off there, but
Yeah.
segregation still exists.
Mhm.
Segregation just isn't called segregation anymore. It's called gentrification. It's
Well,
called.
yeah.
It's not only called gentrification. It's basically you're seeing what I can only describe as segregation by economics. Where you see, low income neighborhoods tend to be primarily composed of minorities. I know I saw this personally. I spent time in a low income neighborhood. I spent time in a public housing, and most of the people there were minorities, and most of the people there end up staying there, and they're not really given the opportunity to advance themselves economically to the point where they can move out of those neighborhoods. And so you'll see it becomes essentially entrenched in this cycle of, okay, I lived in public housing, my mom lived in public housing, and I don't feel like I can get out of public housing. And you repeat that cycle. So that's the kind of segregation that we see today. Segregation, like you said, the civil rights movement never ended. It's still continuing today, and what they were fighting for back then, we're still fighting for today.
Right. I think it's ridiculous that people also say like, oh, why can't the protesters be more peaceful like Martin Luther King? It's like he was assassinated, right?
That those protesters were they had fire hoses turned on them, right?
Right, exactly. So it's ridiculous that people try to make these comparisons.
The same exact people who say that are the same exact people who got upset when Kaepernick kneeled. They're the same exact people who got upset when people protested because of Trayvon Martin. They're the same exact people who got upset when Obama was elected. You want to know why, Joseph? Because those people are racist.
Yeah.
And they'll find any excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to do as, allies, is to call that out and to be actively anti-racist. You can't just be, passively anti-racist. You need to actually say it. When your uncle makes that racist joke at the barbecue, call him out on it. Mm-hmm. If I know that I personally, I had somebody in a group chat actually do the whole, when the looting starts, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And I straight up called him out on his fucking racist bullshit because you want to know why? Because I've known this guy. And this guy he's one of those guys that, when somebody he's interested in, like a girl he's interested in, hooks up with somebody who's black, he all of a sudden does a complete 180 on them. And it's just like, oh man, nah, fuck that girl. Like she's a slut. Those people are racist, and it's our duty to call them out on it. And I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that I cut ties with him, because at the end of the day, he was a piece of shit for doing that and for thinking like that. And they'll say, "Oh man, but I'm not racist." They are.
Bringing that into conversation as well. I was talking with Chase about this at one point, and we were kind of talking about, racism is everywhere, but where is it more prevalent throughout the country? What cultures have been more infused with racist antics? And we were talking. I immediately went like, oh, the South and the Midwest are obviously raised in a more in this kind of prejudice background. Like immediately they have these kinds of prejudices, and immediately Chase kind of went and said that this area, these kind of the New York, New Jersey, just the tri-state areas, actually the people here seem to be more racist without really realizing that they are. And what he meant by that was, like if you go down to like Texas, for example, if someone says something racist about a Hispanic, they don't usually care where that Hispanic came from. It's just to them, it's just a Hispanic or a Mexican, right? That's what they'll refer to them as.
That's still racist, though.
Right, exactly. It's racist. But my point is that they're just like, oh, that's just a Hispanic. But you come up here, and his point was, you see Hispanics kind of making fun of other Hispanic groups, like, you know, over here in Union City, there's a big Dominican population over here in Union City, and you see a lot of people making fun of them, especially for the way that they speak Spanish. The dialects are not. It's not really a dialect, but the accents are very different.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people just joke about it. Like, it's not inherently like, oh, look, fuck you, you talk weird, but they make jokes about it. And you know, like, there are people here making fun of. There are Hispanics making fun of other cultures. You know, you see Ecuadorians and Peruvians making fun of each other. You see, you know, Argentinians and Chileans, or different countries. You know, kind of being hostile towards each other. I don't know if hostility. Right. So, you know, Chase is saying, like, you know, there's more racism up here than there is down there, because down there, even though it's racist, there is racism, and obviously, you know, they're just generalizing all Hispanic groups. Up here, our own Hispanic groups are kind of making fun of each other, and, you know, making fun of the different because they came from a different country. They're funny to point and laugh at, and I've seen that, and I agree with that. There's a lot of that up here, but I don't really know if. I think they're both just terrible. I don't really know if one is worse than the other, and I don't know if which one really speaks to the prevalency of racism in one area.
Well, I will say this though, I have not heard of an Ecuadorian shooting a Dominican because he was Dominican.
Right, that doesn't happen.
I've heard of a white man shooting a black man because he was black.
Right. No, and that's another point that I was saying to him was, like, you know, the antics that go up here, even though you could definitely say that they're racist, they're usually formed in jokes. You know, they're usually said in a humorous way. I'm not saying that they inherently are funny, but people usually say them with the intention of being funny, you know. But they never actually go out and do anything harmful to anyone. It's just kind of like passive aggressiveness. But if you go down to other areas, you know, you go down, like, let's say Texas, you know, a white cop will, or just not, it doesn't even have to be a white cop. We saw what happened in Georgia, where the jogger was, you know, the kid was killed for, Ahmaud Arbery. He was killed for, you know, by somebody who wasn't even a cop. It was just an act of vigilantism.
No, hold on. It was not vigilantism at all. It was straight up fucking murder because he was black.
No, but that's my point. Vigilantism is murder. It's not legal for a reason. It's still.
I know. I understand that, but don't dignify those people with that.
Yeah. I don't. I just don't look at the word vigilante as a positive thing from the get go. You know, it's Joe Rogan was actually talking about this. He also called it, I think, vigilantism. Just because it at the end of the day, that's what they were attempting to do, but. Regardless, it's murder. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I really have to disagree with you there, and I think that Joe Rogan is not the person to go to on a lot of beliefs. To be honest, it was three people, three white men, loading up in a truck to go shoot a black man. That's what it was. It was not any kind of vigilantism. It was a straight up hate crime. Don't like you know, Joseph. I understand where you're trying to go for it, like where you're trying to go with it, but I wholeheartedly disagree with the way that you're phrasing it. Because these people, these three fuckheads, literally shot a man for being black, a man who was simply going for a jog.
Yeah, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just literally running through the neighborhood, and I don't think what was it that they said that they had him on? Was it burglary or something?
They said that they thought he was breaking into a site that, first off, a lot of people walk through, and second, that the owner of the site knew that the man, like Ahmaud Arbery, was going to be there. Like he knew that he went through there, and it was fine. So that's where I disagree with you calling it vigilantism, because vigilantism implies that there was any kind of crime done to begin with.
Well, I don't think it implies that there was a crime to begin with. I think it's just somebody trying to quote unquote take justice into their own hands. I'm not saying that's actually what they did or that was their actual excuse. It was a lie. It was a hate crime.
I'm saying in order for someone to take justice into their own hands, they have to believe that there is an injustice to begin with.
Right. No, and I agree with that. And clearly there wasn't, and it was just a hate crime. But I feel like that was given the kind of defense they tried to give, that was kind of their their excuse supposedly. But if you look into the details, it was just a hate crime. There was no real heroic aspect to it. I don't really know how they thought they'd get away with it either. Well, they did for like 2 whole months, didn't they? Because the video didn't get released until April, or was it March? I don't remember, because it happened in February.
Yeah.
And
if they hadn't taken that video, they probably would have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
And it was one of the guys. It was the third guy, right, that took the video, right? It was one of the people involved that filmed the whole thing.
Yep.
And I think they released the video because the attorney thought it was a good idea. I think the attorney said that it would exonerate them for whatever reason. So their attorney released the video, and that's why it's out there. Obviously, they didn't release it because if you've watched it, it's pretty incriminating. Yeah. Not pretty. It is incriminating. And but for whatever reason, their lawyer thought it would be a great idea. It would defend their clients. I don't know how, but
Well, what I will say though is that there are still ways in order to help support the Black Lives Matter movement. Something I'd like to talk about briefly before we should probably end the stream. We've been going on for a bit here. So some of the best ways to actively participate is to first speak with the people that are, you see a lot of racist actions that you don't really think are racist. And a lot of people in the moment, they think, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to rock the boat. One of the best things you can do now, and it always has been to rock the boat and to call that out. Be actively anti-racist. Not only that, but donate to bail funds that are bailing out protesters that have been illegally arrested. Also, donations to the NAACP, the ACLU, as well as other funds. Support your Black-owned businesses, and remember that Black lives do matter. And if you hear anybody say all lives matter, that first off, they're full of shit. All lives matter is a protest to a protest. What kind of what is that?
Right.
All lives matter is essentially a slogan that people who are racist and internalizing that racism will try to use as a defense in order to not say Black Lives Matter. And it's something that should be called out as such. So if you see somebody say all lives matter, kick them in the fucking teeth. Don't they're full of shit.
I think at the end of the day, we also still have to talk to the people that disagree with us and try to convince them to be on our side. Because, there are people that already agree with us, and, there's no convincing to be done with those individuals. So people on the other side, the horrible people that we have to not try, but those are the people that have to change or be on or reform or at least be on our side. I'm not saying that people can't change or are going to stagnate and be the same, the rest of their lives. But I'm not saying be nice to horrible people. But I think, sometimes it does better sometimes to question why those people think the way that they do, and try to get them at least try to get them to be on your side or swap sides, I should say.
And that is what I was mentioning when I was talking about being actively anti-racist. You do need to challenge those people. Challenge them to try to defend their shitty beliefs, because those beliefs are shitty. And if they can find some kind of defense for them, well, you just point out exactly how.
Well, they're not, because there is no defense for that.
Exactly.
So they're not going to find one. But I think it's it's like it's the same thing. I guess not the same thing, but I can call it back to a political moment that I remember of. When the whole primaries are going on, and Tulsi Gabbard got shit for going on like Fox News and all of that. You know, the reason she was doing that is because she's a Democrat. She doesn't have to convince a Democrat to be on her side. You know, she doesn't have to convince somebody that's already on her party to agree with her. But she's going on those networks because the conservatives are the people that don't agree with her. Those are the people she has to try and sway. So, you know, I think given any situation, the people that are against you are the people that you have to try and sway to be on your side. Because then that's the way that you increase your numbers and support. And that's the way that change, I think, eventually happens as well. Problem is most people aren't very open to changing their minds. Most people are, you know, most people are pretty embedded in their beliefs, and they're not going to budge no matter what. That's the unfortunate part, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. Anyhow, yeah, I guess we'll just leave it with that. I don't know if you want to give any extra thoughts, Laz, before we close out.
My extra thoughts would be to go out, protest, exercise your First Amendment rights, to go out and donate to organizations that are actively trying to help protesters in this time, whether it be bail funds, whether it be organizers who are organizing protests. Fuck looters. Fuck looters. They completely discredit the movement, and to be honest, fuck looters. That being said, I think that it's a good note to end on would be that Black Lives Matter. And until Black Lives Matter, all lives can't matter.
Very well said. And on that note as well, everybody that's been tuning in and listening and watching, please remember, Black lives do matter, period. If you can attend a protest, if you can participate in any way in this movement, please do. Don't stay silent. Do everything that you can to push this movement forward and make sure that it's heard. Make sure that people understand that this is important and this is history and this is something that we need to fight for. And
remember, there's nothing more beautiful than a rock to a racist's face.
Right, exactly. So I guess we're going to close it off there. We didn't really have as many jokes as we usually do, but this is a very serious topic that's kind of hard to interject comedy into. So it's been nice talking to you, man. I like that, you know, we got this much out of just the two of us, because we're usually used to having, you know, like 3 to 4 mics on here.
Yeah.
But anyhow, man, it's been great. Everybody listening and tuning in, thank you for watching the live stream if you tuned in live. For people listening to this on Spotify and iTunes and Google Play, please remember to subscribe to the podcast on there so that you can get weekly updates whenever we do upload. See you guys later.
And also,
go ahead, Laz.
And also follow us on Instagram. We're at the 54 Podcast, and share your thoughts. Share your thoughts about the podcast. Share any criticisms you have. We love to hear from people. To be honest, we're just getting started here, and it's definitely been great to hear feedback from the people who actually do listen. So
right, and you know, you could say anything. You could review us. You could post any kind of feedback that you'd like on the comments section of YouTube, or you know, you can send us DMs even through Instagram if you'd like to. You know, anything helps. And please remember at the end of the day that these are all our own, you know, opinions that we're discussing and talking about when we're on this podcast. So just be aware that, you know, we're also starting off. Broadcast isn't exactly something that we exactly have been trained to do. So just be aware of that. Yeah, exactly. So just be aware of that, guys. Anyhow, it's nice that we got to do this. So I'll see all you guys later. Hasta luego.
Peace.